Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming to, I guess, the first academic lecture of the new academic term for the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk. It feels like a particularly appropriate moment to be hearing a talk about the risks of nuclear weapons arsenals, and for two reasons, only one of which is Kim Jong-un, the very careful and considered remarks of Donald Trump at the United Nations recently, and the whole kind of North Korea situation. The other reason, for those of you who know your history, is that in about 3 hours, it'll be the 34th anniversary of the moment at which Stanislav Petrov may or may not have saved the world back in 1983. Petrov passed away in obscurity earlier on this year, so it's a good time to kind of put us in mind of his memory. So 34 years ago, this guy Petrov was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet military when he received an early warning of a nuclear missile launch, a US Minuteman, and then a second, and then a third, and then a fourth, and a fifth. Now, Petrov was of the view that it seemed kind of unlikely that the United States would start a full-on war with just 5 missiles, so he radioed in a false alarm to his superiors. And there have been a lot of these kinds of situations over the last couple of decades. 4 years previously, in 1979, NORAD, which is the North American Aerospace Defense Command, I always need to write that down, got in touch with the US's National Security Advisor to say that the Soviets had launched 250 missiles aimed at the United States. It turned out on that occasion that this had been caused by a training scenario disk being put into an operational computer, leading them to think that there was actually a war about to start. And that wasn't enough. In the months after that, there were 3 other similar false alarms caused by things like computer error. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is that when we tend to think about the risks of nuclear war, we tend to think of Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump, John F. Kennedy, Nikita Khrushchev, the people who might bring us into these wars or who might step away from the brink. But there have been lots and lots and lots of near misses and problems over the last decades caused by the infrastructure around nuclear weapons. The weapon systems themselves, the computers, the humans at different points of the process, and the interaction between all these things. And so any decision to mess with that, to update it or not to update it, that's a really important decision that needs to be treated very carefully. And all of this is why I think that the talk we're about to hear from Heather represents probably one of the most important talks that you'll hear all year. I won't say more about the topic other than to introduce Heather herself. Heather is a senior research fellow at the Department for Politics and International Relations at Oxford, a research scientist at the Global Security Initiative at ASU, Arizona State University, a fellow at the New America Cybersecurity Initiative, and a fellow of our own Center for the Future of Intelligence. In recent years, she's done some of the sharpest and most important work that I know of on topics ranging from nuclear security, technology and the future of warfare, and policy and artificial intelligence. As a result, partly of the latter work, academia now loses her to DeepMind, which is one of the world's leading companies in artificial intelligence, where she'll be starting next week. It's very much a loss for academia, but speaking for myself, I'm actually very reassured that one of the leading companies in artificial intelligence in the world today is going to be guided by one of the leading thinkers on artificial intelligence policy from academia. So we're very grateful to have Heather here today because it gives us the opportunity to hear one last public lecture on these topics from her and to give her a proper send-off from academia. Before I introduce her, I should mention very briefly, this is the first of what is a really exciting docket of talks for us at CSER this year. We have managed to sell out already for Max Tegmark's talk next month, but it will be online. 450 of you are coming, which is wonderful. The month after that, we're going to have a great talk from Laura Kahn from One Health on pandemics. I believe it's called Meat, Mosquitoes, and Malaria. And we have some interesting talks coming up next year from Sabina Leonelli, who's a leading philosopher of science, and Jared Diamond, who's famous for his work on collapse and his book on guns, germs, and steel. So without further ado, please do look out for those talks, sign up to our newsletter, sign up to our social media, Twitter and Facebook, and please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Heather Roff.
Thank you. I am excited to be here, and I'm very thankful for the invitation from Sean and Hugh. So my talk today is going to be kind of rambly, because that's how I roll. But hopefully you'll learn something along the way. So for those of you who don't know anything about nuclear weapons, here's your nuclear powers. Here's how many warheads they have, deployed or stockpiled, with nice big question marks for our friend Kim Jong-un. And then I have this nice little quote, right, from Elon, my buddy Elon, who says, it's worth reading superintelligence, not on here all the way, but it could be more dangerous than nukes. And I want to say, really? Really? Because what if you put AI and nukes together? That would be terrifying, right? So this is kind of where I'm thinking about in my talk. So the reality about nuclear modernization is not just one of thinking about strategic kind of Cold War mentalities. It's really about thinking in the next 20, 30, 40 years down the line, and how we're going to procure weapon systems, particularly nuclear weapon systems, during that time. Mostly because, ta-da, the infrastructure is still from the 1960s. So to start my little talk here, so sometime in the early 1960s, which was the dawn of great nuclear infrastructure, the United States' Strategic Air Command, or SAC, with their war planners, along with 2 RAND analysts, were walking to SAC headquarters, having just finished their breakfast at Offutt's Officers Club. As General Russell Daugherty recalls the story, quote, "We are closing in on the SAC motto displayed near the door. Peace is our profession." Rand's James R. Schlesinger, who later became the Secretary of Defense, by the way, and the Secretary of Energy, observed that this was a fairly sweeping command charge, whereupon his colleague Herman Kahn, author of Thermonuclear War and founder of the Hudson Institute, said, "Ha, if peace may be their profession, but if they don't want to go broke, making war better be their damn business." And this, to me, is kind of the sentiment behind what's driving the nuclear modernization right now. Nuclear modernization right now is focusing on the Triad. So for those of you who don't know the Triad is basically the 3 strategic aspects that you can basically defend and threaten deterrence. So submarine launched ballistic missiles from nuclear submarines, ground-based silos, particularly of the Minuteman missiles from the 1960s, that have gone through about 3 different upgrades over the last 40, 50 years, and bombers, strategic bombers like the B-2. All of these aspects of the Triad have to be updated, not just one. In fact, the ground-based silos that we have at Offutt Air Force Base, well, Offutt is actually where Stratcom is now, but in Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, in these areas, they were built to withstand nuclear fallout. But they were also built on a different type of information communication infrastructure. So you can't hack them, because everything is 10 feet down, encased in concrete, and pressurized. So if you were to try to tap the line, the pressurization would go. Someone would know that you've gotten into it, and all the alarms would silence, and you would basically find out where your bad guy is. But now, with modernization and the internet and speed and everything like this, now you're starting to look at things like maybe a fiber optic cable that is not wrapped in concrete and pressurized 10 feet down. And that has different types of security risks just for the information cable, just for the information to get from launch to, from a yes, yay, nay, to launch. That is going to be a huge area. for us to think about. So for those of you who don't know, this guy is carrying the football, the US football. And if you happen to be with Trump, you can get your picture taken with him, apparently, on cell phone. It's all over the internet. It's great. Nothing like operational security. So the football carries all of the instructions of what to happen in case someone were to launch nuclear weapons. One's biscuits. These are not your nice tea biscuits. These are little cards that you crack open, and they have a series of codes on them. And then you call the next person, and they've got a series of codes. This is the two-man rule, right? So you have two people verifying codes all the way down from the time the commander-in-chief says launch to the time that someone at a Minuteman silo or a submarine says push the button and go. That is increasingly becoming more and more unlikely, given the speed at which you need to respond to a potential nuclear attack. For those of you who may or may not know, if, say, Soviet Russia decided to launch a nuclear weapon today, right now, it would take 30 minutes to travel from Moscow to DC. If they happen to launch from a submarine off of the East Coast, which is more likely, it drops to 7 minutes. So you can imagine the end of the world is in 7 minutes. What would you do with your 7 minutes, right? Mostly what you're going to do is you're going to automate as much as you can. Unfortunately, when you do this automation, so NC3 is nuclear command and control, you have to rely on a series of programs and procedures that can take more than 7 minutes, more than 30 minutes to actually get through when you start thinking about breaking my biscuit and give it to you, and the next person goes down, the next person goes down, the next person goes down, all the way to launch. So the idea is to streamline nuclear command and control by automating as much as you can from signal, when you get a signal that there might be a launch, which you also have to have what's called dual phenomenology, which you have to have two sensor readings telling me that that's actually a weapon that has been launched. But the problem is that the nuclear command and control infrastructure, as it stands now, is still the infrastructure from the 1960s. Except for all of the neglect that our commander has shown, we have been consistently trying to patch and modernize our nuclear weapon systems. This also, by the way, it applies to Britain as well. Britain may not have nuclear weapons on its soil, but it does have them on its subs. And it uses the Trident missiles made and built in Alabama, and then it uses the signals intelligence from the US Air Force to confirm whether or not any sort of potential threat has been launched. So you can kind of think of it this way. If anybody ever wanted to attack Britain, they'd have to call the US first. Are we under attack? No? Okay, great. Right? So in a sense, all of this infrastructure is built on the backbone of the United States nuclear command and control infrastructure. So we've been modernizing pretty much all the way from the 60s up till today. And in fact, the Department of Defense is now estimating that the new modernization efforts to bring these 1960s relics into the modern day age, where we no longer need 8-inch floppy disks or 9-track tape to do our targeting analysis, which, by the way, is still what they use, will cost $1 trillion. $1 trillion to upgrade the strategic triad. Now, if you think that maybe we don't need to think about the triad, maybe what we really need to think about is just the more credible threat, which would be a submarine. So here's who have all of these lovely little, you've got your Vanguards, Ohio. Ohio's actually going to go out of date here soon. And the US Navy has procured what's called the Columbia class, which is a new nuclear submarine, nice and super quiet, to sneak up on all those bad guys. Except for if you're going to have the Columbia class submarine to sneak up on all those bad guys. Interestingly, and I find this funny that there's a typo in the article's title, but Russia has apparently decided it doesn't even care about the submarines anymore. What it wants is it wants unmanned submersibles, right? So think drone in the ocean. Drone in the ocean with nukes on it. Amazing idea. No. Can you imagine the strategic crisis of the Cuban Missile event, and it was fully automated with a drone, and it not having Kennedy and Khrushchev and everybody going back and forth? But no, let's just put nukes on a drone. Sounds great. That's terrifying. If it's not terrifying to you, I hope it soon will become terrifying to you. Because this is what happens when you start to get a little bit too gung-ho, right? When you start to think, man, I really want to up my game. And how would you up your game in nuclear modernization? Well, one is through strategic planning and intelligence. Basically what happens is you get an AI, an artificial intelligence, an agent, that can model complex situations. And it can model so many of these different types of complex situations that it can spit out what's called courses of action, or COAs. And those COAs then go to commanders, and the commander says, that looks good, this is great, that's not so great, go with that one. Except for, why would you even need the commander at this point, right? I mean, if you can model so many complex interactions and you can do probabilities of what will happen where and how, the human becomes superfluous in some sense. And this is where the role of not only nuclear modernization, of thinking, do I want a long-range standoff capability? Do I want do I want more Trident subs, something like this? No. What I think about it in terms of speed and distance. How fast can I make decisions? And how fast can I launch weapons? And this is something that's going to be new, I would say new in the future of war, only because if you think about the strategic interaction between states, right? You want to be the first one. You want to be the first striker. You want to take out somebody's infrastructure first. You want to make the rules of the road. But in order to do that, you have to have all the information, and you have to be much speedier at how you do it. And that, unfortunately, means that we're going to invest more fully and consistently in machine learning. We're going to invest more in artificial intelligence. And we're going to invest more in robotics, because the nuclear triad isn't going to be sufficient anymore if it's slow and brittle and cumbersome. So the United States is ultimately, I would say, we don't even need this guy anymore, right? We can have autonomous weapon systems that can select and engage targets without the intervention of a human operator. Now think about autonomous weapon systems that are nukes. Oh, terrifying, right? I mean, think about this. We already are on a launch on warning posture. We are a hair trigger posture right now. And my lovely president, my ever gracious gem of a president, is insulting not only his allies, but Rocket Man. And the hair trigger response for us is likely to escalate in return. And so if you think about this and the speed with which an artificial intelligence can model and come up with a different kind of course of action, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to think about where in this, from launch on warning to detonate on detection. So I would say really quickly that most of what the United States military does is already sufficiently automated. Sensor systems are automated. Sensor processing networks are automated. Most of the decision aids we have are automated. And in reality, they tend to try to think of this as what they call centaur warfighting, which is melding the human with the machine. So get the best out of the human and get the best out of the machine. But in reality, what happens is what's called automation bias. And this is where we think that the machines know better than us, because Apple is so pretty. Clearly, whatever the message pops up on my phone, oh, yes, must turn right. None of us can navigate anymore, right? And this automation bias creeps into a large array of decision making. And that is to say that if the machine tells you something, you will just take it as fact. This is increasingly becoming more pertinent in the nuclear modernization camp because we don't have the expertise anymore. Because the Cold War is over, don't care about Russia, don't care about nuclear weapon systems pointing at each other. We don't have to hide under our desks anymore. And so the expertise of maintaining a nuclear weapon infrastructure is gone. And it's been degrading over the years. And the prestige of being a nuclear weapons officer is gone. Now this is where you go to die. Your career goes to die in the nuclear weapons officer. Because no one wants to go 30 feet underground and sit in a silo for 8 hours a day and look at a computer system that is older than you. And this is unfortunately the reality of the modernization program as we see it now. All of the expertise that is required to make sure that safety and surety are job number one is withering away. And so now who do you have? You have a different set of officers and enlisted who don't really care, are saddled with weird old procedures that they have figured out workarounds, such as, for instance, in 2007, when the United States just happened to misplace several live warheads from Minot Air Force Base to Barksdale, Louisiana. Because the transport officers put these giant missiles on a transport truck with a whiteboard with their numbers on them, and some of the numbers got smudged. And then when the guys at Barksdale unloaded this pallet of missiles, and they checked the codes, because they did what their job was supposed to do. They went to the actual serial codes, they checked them, and they go, oh my God, these are live. Oh, yeah, 2007, right? Not too far away, only 10 years ago. And when you think about that, this is the type of procedure that is getting quote unquote modernized, whiteboards and 9-track tapes and 8-inch floppies to what? Machine learning, robotics, artificial intelligence, and the internet. There's so much room for disaster, particularly when you think about industrial espionage. Has anybody ever heard of China stealing the F-35 plans? Yeah. In fact, if you take a picture of the F-35, and then you take a picture of China's version of the F-35, and you slice it down the middle and you line them up, they're the same. And this is really interesting, right? Because when you think about the modernization of the Triad, you have to think about delivery platforms. Nuclear weapons don't make any sense if you can't actually deliver them, right? I mean, I could have a stockpile of nuclear weapons, but if they don't go anywhere, then great, right? I'm just sitting on potentially explosive material. So you have to have a delivery platform, which of course, if you know Kim Jong-un and his lovely rhetoric lately, this is his big thing, right? He needs a delivery platform. He needs an ICBM that can actually reach someplace, because only then is it threatening, particularly to the United States. So if you need a delivery platform, you have to think about, okay, so it's not just the missile that needs to be modernized. It's not just the propellants that need to be exchanged. It's not just the guidance systems that need to be updated. It actually has to be the planes and the subs It has to be the missile silos themselves and all the communications infrastructure going into those. And at that point, once you see the modernization of what that's going to take, particularly interestingly, the F-35 is going to have nuclear weapons capability. Awesome, except for the fact that we've lost most of our intellectual property to adversarial states, and now we're going to put nuclear weapons on the same airframe that they have. Great deterrent threat. This is not something that I can stress enough in terms of the types of systems that are going to come online are going to be smaller. Think tactical nukes. South Korea's opposition just asked for tactical nuclear weapons to be delivered to South Korea because of the saber rattling happening. So you can think tactical nukes, not strategic nukes. You can think of swarms of robotics. You can think of small, tiny drones, small payload, and getting around enemy air defenses. That's the future of modernization. The strategic triad as we know it doesn't really work so well if you can get around it in various ways. Unmanned systems, swarms of robotics, directed energy weapons. All of these things threaten, in a conventional way, the unconventional strategic deterrent. And no one has actually sat down and really thought about how that's going to affect the way states bargain and how they interact. Because right now, we all assume that no one wants to go to a nuclear war, right? We all assume that no rational person would ever, ever, ever push the button. Except now we're in a place where there's a whole bunch of irrational people, right? I don't think that Kim Jong-un would bat an eyelash if he had the capability. I don't think that Trump would bat an eyelash. In fact, it was rumored, this is the scary part, it was rumored that when he became first elected and he was being briefed, he asked why we haven't used nuclear weapons in Syria. 3 times. Why can't we use nukes? No, 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 no. Why can't we use nukes? No, 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 no. Why can't we use nukes? No, 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 no. Right. So I think in light of that kind of international strategic balance, anything that will offset the other will be seen as a threat. So you might think, well, what would be offsetting? Well, this is actually the United States' entire new strategic landscape. It's called the third offset. The third offset is going to use cheap cruise missiles, swarms of robotics, artificial intelligence, directed energy weapons, lasers, unmanned systems, and autonomous weapons. Why would one think that you're going to keep these 2 things separate anymore, conventional and strategic? In fact, the United States military doesn't even have them separate anymore. It used to be separate. It used to be the Strategic Air Command, SAC. SAC went away in the 90s. And now it's STRATCOM, Strategic Command. But STRATCOM doesn't, it's in charge of so many things. It's in charge of space weapons. It's in charge of nuclear arsenals. It's in charge of pretty much anything having to do with anything. I used to work indirectly for STRATCOM. I used to train dolphins. And surprisingly, for the Navy, and surprisingly, dolphins are a strategic asset. Who knew? But this is, because the purview is so big, there's no specialty anymore. And this gets back to what I was saying before. There's no specialty anymore. No one takes honor in job 1, which is nuclear surety, which is that humans remain in positive control. It's the positive-negative thing, right? Or the always-never, right? You always have to have proper authorization. You never launch without it, right? The weapons will always be maintained. They will always function properly. if needed. But it just doesn't make sense anymore when you've removed the human so far from the decision tree. Because right now, even that nuclear football is outdated. The targeting lists that are inside the nuclear football are outdated. We have sufficient evidence of where we'd like to target. If China attacks, go here. If Russia attacks, go there. We have Google Maps. We know exactly where we're going. The problem is thinking about how to modernize a force and modernize a force posture, in such a way that doesn't entice bad behavior. Can you imagine India and Pakistan coming together with artificial intelligence and sensors on their borders, two nuclear armed states that don't like each other, and having a launch on warning system that is going to be modeling the likely steps of an adversary? That's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. Because I joke about Trump. I think the generals would probably rein him in. But smaller nuclear-powered states or non-states, particularly with the rise right now in trying to get tactical nuclear weapons and modernize the tactical nuclear force. A tactical nuclear weapon is very small. You don't need to put it on a truck. You can put it in a bag. And that is worrisome, right? The smaller you get, the faster you get. And there it goes. So when thinking about what to do in terms of thinking through where we might have particular threats emerging, I would say that because of the industrial espionage, pretty much all of our current systems are hacked. So that's worrisome. The ground-based silos, if they go to fiber optic cables and command and control is not monitoring the way it used to, that's going to be a problem as well. I mean, you could hack into the NSA, which is the one that creates the daily codes for launch. But that would be too troublesome when you can just actually go to the missile site itself and just hack in and launch. The subs actually, I would say, are more robust as long as there's people on them. They use a very low frequency antenna. It's about a mile long, and they trail it, and that's how they get any sort of launch warnings. And it's very slow. It's like 10 kbps, right? It's like bloop, bloop. Very, very slow data transmission. But because of that, you can't hack it, right? So you can't hack the sub through its data transmission. But the one thing that you can do, always, is hack the human on the sub. Which in fact, in Britain this last year, there was a nice report about this, about submariners basically having the most lax standards of information security and technology. People bringing thumb drives on and doing all sorts of nasty little cyber hygiene things on board your Trident subs. So you can hack the human. But I would say, kind of just to follow up, there is one interesting technology that might save us yet. So I'm not going to end on like gloom and doom. And that's quantum key distribution and quantum encryption. Quantum key distribution can use basically quantum entanglement to distribute a key, an encryption key, from one place to another. China's already actually done this. They're kicking our butts in the quantum area. They've successfully distributed a quantum key from space to Beijing. Quantum entanglement, photons key distribution, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of miles apart. What happens is if you try to hack into that quantum entanglement, you lose it, right? So the moment you even snoop on the quantum entanglement, you know someone's snooping on you. It's gone. So it's like the most secure form of encryption that we have is to do this quantum key distribution. And that, I think, if we're smart about it, could be the ways in which to encrypt, as well as to protect any type of codes or launches or anything else when it comes to a nuclear arsenal. Because I really hope that I'm not waiting for Trump to say yes or no. I'm really hoping that everything, the satellites and the communications from satellites will be encrypted in such a way that it's authenticated, right? This is the legitimate, this is the business right here. It's not spoofed, which is what you can do. You can spoof a lot of these things. So you don't want to spoof it. You want to have this quantum encryption to make it safe. Finally, I would say, too, the nuclear command and control chain is very rigid. All you need is a yes or a no. And in the British case, you don't even need that. There's a letter from the Prime Minister on the sub in a safe. Once that system goes into, we'll call it orbit, once it gets going, it's just rudimentary. Boop, 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 all the way down. So I said before, you can always hack people. And this is the terrifying bit for me. Given that I'm going to start work at one of the leading AI companies in the world, we now have the ability, through artificial intelligence, to spoof video and audio. I can make Putin sing and dance. I can make him say nasty things. I can even maybe spoof him saying, I'm going to threaten nuclear war. So then the question becomes, if you're starting to hack humans using emerging technologies, what's the consequence? Is the decision tree, the decision chain, particularly in the nuclear case, so rigid that no one says no? You don't have a Petrov saying no, because you have video and audio and television and everything telling you this is what's real. But you don't know if it's real because all of your sensor data is coming through an AI that could potentially be hacked or could just be malicious. So that's the bummer of a note, that you could surreptitiously be fooled into thinking that you're going to war. But the highlight is still that there are technologies out there that can still save us. I think quantum has quantum encryption and quantum key distribution has a really, really good shimmer of hope that we can make our systems secure and safe and reliable, even if we're doing it in very tumultuous times, let's just say. So I look forward to your questions. I know it was a bit rambly, but that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Your remarks about how we're dealing with 60-year-old infrastructure with modern technology stuff on top reminded me, last month I was on a trolley bus in the middle of Siberia, which must have been at least 60 years old, if not more, and the conductor at least 2 decades older than that. And people were paying their fares by swiping their smartphones. Now, there didn't seem to be any nukes on the trolley bus, although I think they do drive them around on the roads around their mobile missiles. But not on this trolley bus, fortunately, and I'm still here. Well, thanks for your talk. And we've got questions, but I'm going to move out of this spotlight so that I can see people. So just put your hands up and I'll try and form some sort of queue. Yes, the person in the middle.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting talk. Something I've often been puzzled. Where is the dividing line between tactical and strategic, and I've even heard the term sub-strategic.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you see is mostly on payload, right? So if you're looking at something that's like less than 3 megatons.
Oh, okay.
So to wrap your mind around like what that means, like 3 megatons, right? Oh, it's big. 3 megatons is the entire amount of firepower used during World War II in both theaters, including the nuclear weapons dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. That's 3 megatons. A US Titan missile, which are now decommissioned, had 9 megaton warheads. And we deployed them in 18 little buckets. So there'd be 18 here, 18 here, 18 here. The amount of destructive firepower on one of those was 3 times the amount of all the firepower used in World War II. Mind-blowing, eh?
Question over there.
So you mentioned quantum encryption as a way forward, but it's not very clear for me what's wrong with the current way of exchanging keys.
Yeah, so basically because if we're getting quantum encryption and we're getting closer to quantum computing generally, then the quantum computer can break all of the current key distribution methods.
It can only break a couple out of an array of hundreds that are not being utilized, but they exist.
Yeah, I mean, if you get into a quantum computer, it will break all forms of current types of encryption. The only way that it can't is if you have quantum encryption.
Yes.
I feel that there's a sort of a false dichotomy that you're putting here in that you're worried about the command and control.
Mm-hmm.
If it's perfect, isn't it a case that the president just has to press the red button? And he is the democratic leader, so if you take that away from democracy, then either no one presses the button or anyone can press the button. And I don't see, the problem is in that, the one person, 2 people. Mm-hmm. The command control I personally see as a bit of a red herring, because I think we can now actually make it so the president presses the button and they go.
So the reason why command and control has been so elaborate in the past is to ensure positive control, right? Is to ensure that the president authorizes, and then from there, there's a series of steps that you want to have all of these double checks down the road. So that's kind of where this command and control modernization bit comes through. When you're thinking about all of the different ways in which information comes to you and how it becomes processed and delivered to you, that's every single bit of information, if it's been processed by an AI, if it's been, if the signals are spoofed or jammed, things like that, those are the types of things that the training tape, for instance, so Sean mentioned that the training tape at NORAD, right? It was a VHS tape, right? It was stuck in a computer. And someone goes, oh my God, there's 250,000, 250 missiles launching. And you go, no, go through my checklist. My checklist says, what do I do here, here, here? Oh, training tape. Whoops, right? And so that's that command and control bit. I mean, it's command and control. And so if you automate everything, or you just tell the president, he can just hit the giant red button, things get I don't think you don't want a president to just be like, I have all the power to hit the button, right? You want to have generals around, you want to have admirals around, you want to have people going, is this really it? You want to have the Petrovs around to say, I don't know. You don't want to have the democratically elected, we'll leave that to the side, because I don't know, Russia we'll see if that inquiry comes out. But I would be terrified if he had absolute power to hit the button.
I find it interesting that most of the problems that you've complained about have actually...
Complained? Oh, lovely.
Your illustrations have all been human errors rather than system. It's the whiteboard, it's the
because
we've
had
the tapes
humans
and what
in
have you.
charge.
So
and now we're not
get rid
going
of
to
the
have
humans and
in
you get rid of
charge.
all those problems.
There's a quick way of doing that. You just press a button.
I think we'll move on. Person at the back there.
That was fun, thank you. As somebody who looks at the systemic failures of AI in health, I'm unclear whether I should be reassured or terrified you're going to DeepMind. But yeah, and the failures we've seen have stemmed from a lack of expertise and care, and everything suggests that more humanity in those AI services is better. But as you go from the oldest of technology to the newest of technology, and given we can confuse a self-driving car by pouring salt on the ground or by sticking a bit of tape on a road sign, what are the lessons from the age of the technology you covered for all of the new things that we're hoping will, save the world?
Yeah, I pretty much am pleading with the world states not to put AI on bombs. I've been pleading with the world states for the last 3 years at the United Nations saying, please don't put AI on bombs. It's not a good idea. In fact, AI is really stupid, right? The narrow applications of artificial intelligence right now don't have common sense. You can fool them with a sticker. And so in that respect, some states are listening, some states aren't. There's a meeting in November at the UN for a group of governmental experts to debate whether or not to try to prohibit autonomous weapon systems, whether or not they be nuclear armed or not. But given that fact that the world states also just passed a new treaty banning nuclear weapons, one would hope that those things would be not mutually exclusive. So.
Yes.
If Britain's nuclear deterrent depends on the letter from the Prime Minister and Jeremy Corbyn's the Prime Minister, I think most of your command and control systems are redundant already.
True.
Person over at the far side. Yes.
Thank you. So in the Goldsboro incident, to my understanding, it was almost entirely a technical failure, and even from the safety switches, 3 out of 4 broke.
Mm-hmm.
So isn't it quite paradoxical to rely on technology, even if it's quantum encryption, to make us safer, and isn't it better to turn to the human practices to try and create a safer world?
Yeah, so I mean, I would love to share your optimism, but I just don't. I mean, the world's militaries have no compunction about wanting to maintain human control. They want to automate as much as possible. They want to remove the warfighter from the battle space. They want to have more information all the time. So much information that it's almost impossible for a human to take it in. I mean, if you look at, for instance, if you look at the F-35, right? To fly the F-35, you need a helmet that has 2 visors that shows you all of the data of the plane. Once you're not like freaked out by like all the data on the plane, but you can see around you 180 degrees, right? You're fused with the plane. Now, what happens if your helmet goes out? Right? So, I mean, in that sense, technology is inevitable. Technological development is already underway. When you look at the procurement processes of the US military or the British military or the French, these procurement processes take 30 years, 10, 20, 30-year increments. So things that are coming online now were procured in the 90s. So you can think about modernization in the same way. It's one of the reasons why WannaCry or WannaCrypt, the cyber, the malware that basically shut down the NHS, why it was so effective and worldwide effective was because of Windows, right? People still running Windows 10 and not patching, right? And people go, why are you running Windows 10 on like a $30 million plane or something? Because that was the state of the art when I procured the plane. But now it's taken forever to get the thing over here, and now it's totally outdated. So you can think of all the modernization aspects that we're doing now in terms of nuclear weapons, in terms of conventional weapons, as if you froze time right now, the state of the art, that's what's going to go on them, but we're not going to see them for another 5 or 10 years, which is another reason why the rapid acquisition processes are happening right now within the DoD, because they know that they're behind the 8 ball, and they're calling Silicon Valley, calling Eric Schmidt, please, can you give us an AI? So yeah, so that's where it's at.
Person in the back corner then.
Yeah, what has been happening on the defensive side? So I remember in the 80s, there's this so-called Star Wars program where you have satellites in space that could intercept warheads with lasers and ion beams and so on. Has anything ever come of it?
Well, so yes and no. So Star Wars, for those of you who don't know, is the Strategic Defense Initiative instituted by Reagan in '83. At the same time, there was also the Strategic Computing Initiative instituted at the same time. The Strategic Computing Initiative had 3 different goals. One of them was a self-driving car called the Autonomous Land Vehicle, the ALV. One of them was called the Pilot's Associate, which is now the F-35. And the other one was a battle management software program, which is basically modeling complex interactions on a battlefield in order to deploy, whether or not I need 5 missiles or 10 missiles or whatever it looks like. So those were the 3 main areas of the Strategic Computing Initiative. All of them didn't come about during the SCI. They came about literally a decade later. Now, so in that sense, there's lots of defensive applications that have come out of that. So no longer do we think expert systems are amazing. They're too brittle. What do we have? We have connectionist systems in AI, right? We have deep learning. We have the ability, a lot of the semiconductor work done during the early 80s was done in the private sector, but it was also done by DARPA. So you have to think about kind of like these larger, kind of longer memories of where the defense stuff has actually paid off. We do still invest quite heavily in directed energy weapons, particularly in space, and we've increased within the last 2 years in the defense, the DoD's budget, space defense by almost 2-fold.
Yes.
Dr. Roff, when the 60s infrastructures were being put in place, how far in the future were they looking? How long did they think they might have to last?
30 years.
Okay.
They've already outlived their terms almost by twice. Most of the Minuteman missiles have had their propellants exchanged about 10 years ago. They've had new guidance put on them. But in reality, they're the same old missiles. They're hoping that they're going to get another 10 years out of them before they have the long-range standoff missile. I'm sorry. That's embarrassing. I would totally yell at my students for that. I'd be like, watch it. I think they're hoping to get another 10 years before they can get, I think Lockheed Martin has taken the contract as well as Northrop Grumman for the domestic ballistic missile defense and the long-range standoff missile. So they're hoping that they can get those online in the next 10 years, and then they can retire some of the Minutemens.
Were systems that were procured after that period, are they more robust? Do they take a longer-term view on how long they should last?
No.
Okay.
Not really. I mean, if you look at the Titan missiles, which came after the Minutemen, those were the big ones with the 9 megaton warheads on them. They were not as robust. In fact, I don't know if you guys have heard of the Titan missile. It basically, there was an accident in Arkansas in the early 80s where there were some maintenance men, and they came in to do maintenance on the missile and the warhead, and the guy was kind of jury-rigging something, and he had a socket, and he was trying to open up a valve, and the socket dropped. It was about an 8-pound socket, and it dropped about 70 feet because the Minuteman missile is 100 feet tall. And it hit the propellant canister on the side of the missile. The propellant started shooting it everywhere. 2 people died in that explosion, and luckily only 2 people. Because if the warhead had actually exploded, a 9 megaton warhead exploding in Arkansas would have taken out pretty much all of the South and all the way up. We'd had fallout all the way up to Washington, D.C.
Hayden.
Last year in the British debates over the successor program to Triad, the Labour opposition defence spokesperson was arguing that by the end of the program, sort of 30, 40 years in the future, sort of autonomous drones would be so good that the submarine program, they just would be tracked all the time, so they wouldn't be a useful, credible deterrent. But then this got widely panned by people. I was just wondering what your view on that was.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things about autonomous submarines, right? So one of them is that we have very good acoustic libraries of the sounds of ships, right? So we have an incredibly accurate database of all of the submarines and ships worldwide, right? So in that sense, it's quite precise, right? So if you deploy, say an automatic target recognition software on an autonomous drone that has that really good library, it'll probably work. The tricky part comes in not in identifying the acoustic signatures, but getting out the noise. Because the ocean's very noisy. It's a big black washing machine, right? And so if you deploy a whole bunch of these autonomous drones underwater, we call them UUVs, unmanned underwater vehicles, they still have to figure out, they have to cut the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, right? So in that sense, I'm a little more skeptical about really deploying, Russia's autonomous drone with a nuke on it. Having researched Russian weapons, they tend not to take a lot of precautions in the way they design things. So that's also terrifying to me, because I'm like, oh, how many quarters did we cut? So I think that would be, but I do think that, in 30 years, you're going to see a lot of unmanned systems doing all sorts of this stuff. If Amazon is delivering your Prime to your house on a drone, I have a feeling your weapons will be delivered via this way as well.
Yes, person there.
Hi, thanks to you for your talk, Dr. Roff. I'm curious about the way that you're talking about swarms and kind of nuclear triad, because it's something that I know that the military in the U.S., particularly in everywhere, is developing, but not necessarily in a nuclear context. Can you say a little bit more about what are some of the perils involved in that and how it might be possible? Is there any way to defend against such a thing, because the nature of the swarm makes it, there isn't a stable target.
Exactly, which is why they like it. So, I mean, there's no plans on the docket right now to have nuclear swarms.
Okay.
But what I do foresee is the evolution of swarming technologies, and then thinking about how you would actually defend, or how you would. So if you were to do a first strike, say, right? First off, you'd have to saturate your target pretty heavily. In order to do this, if you want to saturate your target and you're going to launch, say, 200, 300 missiles, right, and just blow up a country, that's one way to do it. But another way to do it is particularly if they have anti-access area denial capabilities, and they've got missile defense capabilities, is to use a swarm, right? So if your adversary has the ability to engage your missiles and take them out, what do? You go in low and you disperse. And then once you're below any of their missile defense systems, you recouple and you hit. I know, I spend a lot of time thinking about terrible things. It's my evil genius hat. But yeah, so that's one way to do it. In fact, that's one of the main reasons why we want swarms, is to defeat anti-access area denial strategies. So if you got a tactical nuke, why not?
Yes, person here.
How do you see the debate changing, particularly with the relationship between humans and AI in command and control as AI improves? over the next 100 years?
How do I see the debate?
Yeah, so how we talked a little bit about how in the command and control structures there's this balance between what the humans want to happen and how much of it is automated. How do you see that changing as AI becomes more integrated into the command and control structures, and as the AI gets, I think, more importantly, better at what it does?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it'll be quite subtle. Mostly because what's going to happen, right, is what we already see is there's a large degree of automation within signals processing and intelligence processing, right? So all of that drone footage, right? So the Gorgon stare is the camera that is on Predator drones, right? And it can just suck up tons and tons and tons of data. But there's no way that human analysts can actually analyze all that data. There's hundreds and hundreds of hours of tapes that people just don't have the bandwidth, literally, to analyze. So now we're relying on AIs to do that and do image processing and behavior identification and all this stuff. And so I think because we have this kind of reliance already on AIs to do that signals processing, to do that data analysis, it's just going to kind of creep, right? It's just going to kind of say, okay, we need a battle management software system. We won't call it AI, we'll just call it software, right? And then we want a decision aid. We're not going to call it an AI, we're going to call it a decision aid. And all of these things start to kind of creep. And before you really see it, right, it's already kind of netted together in such a way that humans just go, the computer told me so. Yes?
Good. Do we have any more questions? Oh, Martina.
Thanks so much for your talk. I have a question in terms of sort of the overall long-term solution to these problems that you've mentioned. I'm wondering, do you think that given this changing landscape, technological landscape and things, the ideal solution, if we had ideal political will, would be complete nuclear disarmament, sort of enforced, verifiable, etc. Or whether it would be something in between, you know, where you'd have some technological solutions like quantum encryption and some human in the loops and things like that. What is your view on
my ideal view would be total nuclear disarmament. I mean, I just think that it's an expensive endeavor that is silly and that could threaten the destruction of the whole human race if you know. I mean, the fact that like we have 9 megaton nuclear weapons and we have 18 of them in a pod, like at what point do you need that much? Right? I mean, it's just like, overkill is like not even like the word of the day, right? I mean, it's just, so I mean, I think that the quote that I opened my talk with, you know, with Herman Kahn saying, you know, war is their business, right? That's exactly the problem, is that war is a business, right? And the defense industrial complex is a business. And I mean, you look at the GDP allotted to defense. It's a lot of money, right? You look at the US Defense Department's budget, and then you look at the next 12 states down. It's a business. So there won't be disarmament because it's a business. But I would like it to be complete. I mean, I would love, you know, for rainbows and unicorns and no nuclear weapons, but unfortunately I see the writing on the wall.
Okay. Is there anyone who hasn't yet asked a question who'd like to do so? In that case, you, sir, can have another quick question.
Oh, I'm going to complain somewhere?
Is there much research being done on human behaviour, sociology, and all the human system side of this? Rather, you know, we were quite dismissive about the AI, but I think some knowledge about,
Yeah, no, I mean, there's quite a bit in human factors. So human factors research, as well as human-computer interaction and human-robot interaction, and how humans actually engage with particular kinds of technology, and some of our kind of cognitive biases, as well as our hang-ups, how we can best integrate and interface with these things. Yeah, there's quite a bit of work being done.
And narcissism.
Question at the back.
Yes, could I ask a question about the implications for Britain's nuclear policy? As I understand it, you're saying that we're locked into this 1960s technology, and indeed, did I hear that we have to get the permission of the US Air Force before we can launch our stuff?
The British use all of the US satellites.
Yeah. So if we ever wanted to attack Washington, which is not impossible, it might be quite difficult.
Given the rather unhelpful comments made of late, yes.
I'm interested in whether there's anything which would help us in Britain to have a better strategic nuclear policy.
The problem, as I see it, is really one of NATO, right? In that all of the NATO countries rely pretty much on US military satellites to get all of their information and kind of targeting and everything. In the British case, now I kind of joke that you have to call into Washington to get approval, but you are getting fed the intelligence coming from the satellites from Washington. So in that sense, right, if they say, guess what, this has just happened, the response would be, from a British standpoint, oh my gosh, I have to respond defensively or something like that. Also because Britain is part of NATO, an attack on any one of the NATO triggers Article 5, and thus everybody has to go. So in that sense, I don't know if there's a better strategic policy. It's also incredibly expensive, right? I mean, so when you're thinking about the Trident, right, this was the debate in Britain last year, this is so expensive. Like, why are we doing this? Particularly because you only have one leg of the Triad, right? You only have the submarine launch, which is useful if you need to launch it. But it also is saying, right, like, we're not going to have a ballistic missile defense in our backyard. So that's kind of a weird, I don't know if there's a better policy rather than saying I'm going to go whole hog and spend more on nuclear weapons, or just give it up and say I'm going to save the money and shift the cost to France or somebody else.
But when the US has AI command and control for these things, we'll have to too.
It's in discussion at the MOD.
Okay, Ted, I think we'll make this the last question.
Well, I was going to ask, but in a way I think you may have answered, but it all went very quiet, all this nuclear stuff went very quiet for a long time, the procurement holiday, as you called it. And I was trying to work out where the turn was and what motivated this huge sudden growth and interest. But I think you've answered it in the kind of Hudson Institute calm response that what's motivated it is business.
It's business. It's also because they're running their course, right? Like, they literally are operationally running their course. They're not going to be safe anymore, right? We've already extended their life cycle so long that they're not going to be safe anymore. So in order to make them safe, we need new ones. And if we need new ones, we need bigger, better, faster, more.
But there's also an adversary in this, because if there was no adversary, there wouldn't be any.
Exactly, and it's also the adversary is right now is Russia and China are undertaking some significant modernization efforts, and so there's this kind of like, oh my gosh, China's got a blue water navy, oh my gosh, like they have A2AD, oh my gosh, how am I going to fight, right? And then with Russia and its capacities in cyber and not so much robotics, but cyber.
Most chess and Go champions are Russian or Chinese, apart from deep minds.
Right, exactly. Go Brits.
Okay, thank you, Heather. I think Sean said at the beginning or implied that your move to DeepMind meant that this would be your last public lecture. I seriously hope that that's not true and that they haven't got some kind of don't speak to anyone clause in your contract. I'd be very surprised if they'd managed that in your case. But in any case, I hope this is not the last time that you'll be able to come up here and give us a public lecture, and also, of course, come up and interact in many other ways. We're delighted that you're going to be just down at King's Cross Station or Cambridge South, as we think of it. But for now, thank you very much for But I'll say it's a rather scary talk, even by our standards.
Thank you.